Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. Today I want to do a bit of a review on the movie Shin Godzilla, as it's called here, or Godzilla Resurgence, as it's called over in Japan. Um, this is not just one of my favorite Godzilla movies. I actually think it's one of the Godzilla movies that stands out as an absolute masterpiece. Um, if you're not familiar with Godzilla, it's gone through a lot of ups and downs over the years. It started in the 50s with a masterpiece, especially, if you've seen the American one, it's a very good movie. If you see the original Japanese one, it's an absolute filmmaking masterpiece. And it uses a lot of allegory, it uses a lot of illusion, things that you'll see time and time again in the Godzilla franchise, but especially well done. Then it's in black and white, which actually kind of makes the monsters scarier. And Godzilla is absolutely unstoppable in that movie, except for a super weapon that they also destroy, um, called the Oxygen Destroyer, which is used in the most recent Legendary Films movie. Uh, but you also have Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla that really stands out. You have Godzilla versus Destroya in the 90s that really stands out as an emotional masterpiece, if not an absolute masterpiece of filmmaking. And you have your low points. Son of Godzilla comes to mind. Um, Godzilla versus Ibira. I would say Godzilla versus King Kong, even though, statistically I'm not accurate on that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Shin Godzilla um, stands out in the modern realm of Godzilla movies, well above and beyond all the other ones. And I love all the modern, everything 80s forward. There's not a Godzilla movie made in Japan that I don't like. Some of them are weaker than others, but I've enjoyed all of them. But the thing that Shin Godzilla does that only one other modern Godzilla movie has done, and I'm going to include the legendary movies in that, is makes Godzilla an absolute threat. And not just one that's like, oh, it's going to destroy maybe Tokyo, or kind of the trope you get with a lot of the Godzilla movies in the 70s, where, yeah, here comes Godzilla, and he's going to fight a giant monster, and they fight in a city, but Japan's so used to it by then that it's really easy to evacuate the cities, not a lot of people die. Shin Godzilla absolutely wrecks Japan, and it's made clear multiple times throughout the movie that Godzilla could not just endanger Japan, but actually threaten to wipe out the human race. And it's sold very well. Um, they update his origin story a little bit to where instead of being created by nuclear bomb tests, he's created by radioactive pollution. A very relevant topic for the Japanese market, all things considered. And but unlike some past Godzilla films and a lot of American movies, it doesn't hit you over the head with it. It just is part of the movie. It's alluded to it. It's but it serves as allegory. It's not just a beat stick of here's what you need to worry about. One of the things the film does though that is absolutely amazing, and you can see it in this picture, the special effects maintain the tradition of the suits, but they make it incredible looking. I mean, this shot here when they're knocking, they use explosives to knock buildings on top of him. It looks absolutely incredible, and this is in 4K. They're not hiding anything. Um, it's in broad daylight, something the Legendary Pictures and all their CGI haven't really done. The music score is awesome, and not only is it awesome, but the way they use it uh, is perfect for each sequence of the film. There's parts of the beginning of the film with absolutely no music whatsoever, and then when it hits, it's at these really emotional moments, and it just really pulls you in. And those moments without music makes it feel kind of like a documentary style of movie. And so you have Godzilla, who is a global threat to humanity, who is constantly evolving as the movie goes on. He starts out as this big monster that's stuck in waterways. Then it evolves the ability to walk uh, low to the ground. Then it stands up. Then when it reaches its final form, it's this 118-meter tall monstrosity. And yeah, he's really ugly, but that's kind of the point. He's this twisted, mutated thing created by humanity's uh, lackluster control, shall we say, of its own nuclear materials. So there's absolutely stunning visuals in the movie. This is an example of one. There's also one at night where he uses his breath weapon for the first time and just wrecks a huge chunk of Tokyo, setting a huge part of the city on fire, destroying buildings everywhere, and it's this really. It starts off as like a fire breath and then evolves into a thin beam of like radiant plasma and posed against the night sky. It's just absolutely stunning. That's an area where Godzilla movies in Japan haven't typically been amazing with special effects. They've been better than most people probably associate them with, because when a lot of people think of Godzilla, they think of like the 70s campy movies. The 80s and 90s had some really good special effects, way improved over the 70s. The 2000s had some really good stuff, but this went totally above and beyond while maintaining that classic model construction, which I think the amount of detail you can see in this shot alone blows CGI out of the water. Where Legendary Pictures is having to hide things with darkness and weird angles, this is just right there. Here's the whole thing. You can see, individual panes of glass breaking out. You can see individual chunks of the building coming down. Um, individual steel beams. You can see the sides of the building peeling off. Over here you can see not just smoke, but you can see where the building has been kind of caved in the middle. You can see kind of scorch marks. That's the kind of thing you just don't get with CGI. I mean, there's masterful levels of CGI, but if we're being honest, most CGI isn't like that. To me, the best effects have always been a combination of the two. I like practical effects touched up and enhanced by CGI rather than CGI effects, pure CGI effects. The other reason this movie is great is the plot's very simple. It's a very direct homage to the original movie, where it's just the monster comes out of the bay, threatens Japan, and they have to figure out a way to deal with it. And it gives them devastation like they've never before seen, and a real not just physical threat, but a emotional and psychological threat. It goes really well into the difficulties, let's say, of the Japanese government and how it responds to certain things, and that is not just a criticism of the government, but it's an allegory for how the government responded to Fukushima. And yet again, it's not a baseball bat to the head. The government isn't pure evil. They're just this big bureaucratic system that takes a while to adjust and tries to put a good face on things like they know more than they do. And it's that same issue you saw with Fukushima where they were slow to really respond appropriately. Uh, and at the same time, the movie ends kind of, hopefully, from a government perspective, where the government's being not reorganized, um, going through some changes to react better. And the monster itself is stopped, but remains in the city. And it's kind of vague as to whether or not it could come back to life or not. But at every point when the monster is in the city, you feel tense. You feel uh, the characters are in real danger. You feel the whole city, the whole country, potentially the world is in real danger. There's not a point where you don't take the monster seriously once it's gotten past its initial stages of development. And then that's really driven home at the end. Um, I don't want to go too far into it and spoil a whole bunch of stuff, but just the combination of the effects, the plot, the homage to the original, the uh, application of sound in terms of music scores, and then there's the way they do the military versus the monster uh, is way better than anything I've seen out of a monster movie in a long time. You know, typically you'll see tanks like drive right up almost to its feet, right, and shoot at it, and planes that fly at its face and shoot at it. And it's a weakness in Japanese and American films of this style because that's not how those things work, right? A fighter jet can fire a missile from miles away, and you really see that in this movie, and it's really effective. Even to the point of how the military operates, has multiple layers of response. It has fallback points, and usually you just don't see that. It's just the military rolls in, they get point blank with it for some reason. You know, heck, in the original movie, you had actual infantry lining up, which they don't do in this, which made sense because of the time period. But that really just everything in this movie is so tight and well put together. And as a redesign of Godzilla, I wouldn't want it to stick around. But as a one-off, it's fantastic. And I think that's where it belongs in the one-off category. So, in Godzilla, you have different eras. You have the Showa era, which is from the 50s through the 70s. The Heisei era, which is the 80s through the 90s. The Millennium era, which is kind of self-explanatory. The Reiwa era, which is what Shin is in. And in some of those time periods, you have standalone movies that don't connect with any of the continuity. They're their own thing. That's what Shin Godzilla is. And it's excellent. And one of the other excellent Godzilla movies that does that It's a horrible name. Is Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, giant monsters all out attack. In a similar vein, where Godzilla is just this huge threat. Um, and amazingly, in that one, they the spine they had to do this. Uh, I wouldn't call it an allegory. It's more direct than that, and it kind of hits the category of hitting you over the head with something, but in a way that's such an excellent pointer at a great weakness in Japanese government approach to history, and is a self-criticism of something that Japan has essentially refused to acknowledge, where Godzilla is possessed by the souls of all the people killed by Japan in World War II. It doesn't make any direct statements after that. It comes up once, and you don't hear about it again, which is one reason it's tolerable and not like an agenda-driven thing. It's just its origin, and that itself is a sharp, sharp criticism, even without explaining what they mean, because you know what they mean. They don't mean necessarily the soldiers. They're talking about the Bataan Death March. They're talking about the massacres in China, these horrible war crimes that Japan committed that has refused the things they did in Korea, has refused to acknowledge, to the point of defunding history in their schools, so that it just simply isn't taught. So it's one of the things these standalone movies do, is they're able to go out there and do kind of whatever they want, and they're usually excellent movies. Um, but the difference between like Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Mothra King Ghidorah and Godzilla Final Wars and what's happening to our franchises over in the United States, like Star Wars and Star Trek, they're being standalone movies. They're able to play with the canon and not pay much attention to the previous canon, but at the same time, they're always stay true to the franchise, to the monster, maybe a different incarnation, but it's still recognizably Godzilla. And unfortunately, with Star Wars and Star Trek, they've disregarded canon, not in standalone movies, but just in everything, and then wonder why people are upset. Star Trek doesn't feel like Star Trek anymore. Not just because it ignores canon, but because it's no longer faithful to what makes Star Trek Star Trek. And in Shin Godzilla, yeah, it ignores every previous movie, including the original, in terms of canon, but it pays respect to it. And that's the big difference. So, if you haven't seen Shin Godzilla and you're a Godzilla fan, I absolutely recommend it. If you're not a Godzilla fan, I still recommend it. This is the movie I would recommend to someone who has not seen Godzilla, or they've seen like one or two of the 70s movies. This is a great movie. The pacing is good, the story is good, the effects are great, the musical score is great, and you can jump in without any prior knowledge. I would recommend, if you haven't seen Godzilla movies, you're not very familiar with them, see this one, then go see Gojira, the original movie, in the original Japanese version. And then if you want, see Godzilla King of the Monsters, not the legendary one, but the original. That's the Americanized version of Gojira. It's also a really good film. Um, they're not the same movie. They are, but they aren't. There's an American insert character, so it's a completely different perspective, which is actually really interesting on its own. But yeah, Absolutely recommend this movie. I love it. Um, I don't own it yet, but I'm gonna correct that, and it will join my Godzilla collection. So if you liked the video, hit the like button, consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you next time.